An invisible delivery girl bled in a rain-soaked alley to protect a stranger from two armed thugs. She didn't know the old man was the only thing the most feared mafia boss in the city still loved, until 20 armored SUVs paralyzed her neighborhood the next morning to pay her back. It was a Tuesday in the city, the kind of night where the rain feels like needles and the wind tries to blow you off two wheels. Lily Parker adjusted her red delivery jacket, the zipper broken and held together by a safety pin, as she checked her GPS for the 10th time. Her hands were numb inside her thin gloves, but she couldn't stop. Not if she wanted to pay off the medical bills that were still coming in her late mother's name. In this city, Lily was a ghost. People saw the red jacket and the steaming food, but they never saw her face. She lived on lukewarm coffee and the hope that her bike wouldn't break down before her shift ended. But while Lily was fighting to survive the poverty of the South Side, the rest of the city lived in the shadow of one name, Vercetti. The Vercetti family didn't walk the streets, they owned them. They were the kings of silence, men who moved in shadows and settled debts in blood. Lily had never seen a Vercetti, and she never planned to. But that night, as she cut through a dark alley to save 3 minutes on a delivery, she saw an old man on the ground and two shadows lunging for him. She didn't think about her debt. She didn't think about her safety. She just dropped her bike and stepped into the light. The wind off the lake didn't just blow in Chicago, it hunted. It found every fray in Lily Parker's red delivery jacket, biting through the thin polyester to the skin beneath. She shifted the weight of the thermal backpack, the straps digging into shoulders that had forgotten what it felt like to be level. To the luxury high-rises she'd just left, she was a blur of red, a nameless, faceless function that brought heat to their tables while she froze on the sidewalk. Lily checked her phone, the screen spiderwebbed with cracks that distorted the GPS map. A new notification popped up, but it wasn't a tip. It was a text from an automated service, final notice. Account ending in 4022 is 90 days past due. She closed her eyes for a second too long, leaning her forehead against the cold handlebars of her bike. Her mother's medical bills were a ghost that followed her through every shift, a debt that grew faster than she could pedal. $200 for a single night of oxygen, $50 for a box of specialized gauze. Those numbers were her heartbeat now, a rhythmic tally of everything she owed to a world that didn't know her name. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled granola bar wrapper, searching for a stray crumb. There was nothing. Her stomach didn't growl anymore, it had settled into a hollow, aching silence that she'd come to accept as a permanent part of her anatomy. She'd skip dinner again to ensure she had enough gas for the bike tomorrow. The weight wasn't just in the backpack. It was in the way her shoes, held together by a prayer and a bit of silver duct tape, slipped on the wet asphalt. It was that Vercetti graffiti she passed on the brick walls of the South Side, a name that meant power, excess, and a terrifying kind of freedom she couldn't even imagine. In the dark corners of the city, the Vercettis were the gods of the underworld, while she was just an ant beneath the pavement. A sharp ping echoed from her phone. A delivery to an address tucked deep into the industrial district, a place where the streetlights had long since been shot out. Most riders would have declined it, but the high-demand surge meant an extra $3. To Lily, $3 wasn't just change, it was 2 cans of soup and a bus pass. She kicked the kickstand up, the metal clanking against the frame like a heavy chain. Just one more, she whispered into the freezing dark, her voice lost in the roar of the city. She turned the throttle, the engine coughing a cloud of white exhaust into the rain, and disappeared into the shadows, a small red spark in a city made of cold, unyielding stone. Dominic Vercetti stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, watching the rain blur the Chicago skyline into a smeared canvas of gray and charcoal. In this city, he was the predator, the man whose silhouette alone could silence a room. His tailored suit was as sharp as his reputation, but inside, a cold, hollow knot was tightening. Behind him, the room was a hive of controlled chaos. Men in dark overcoats stood in the shadows, their phones glowing like embers as they coordinated a silent sweep of every street corner from the Loop to the South Side. "Sir," a voice broke the silence. It was Sawyer, his most trusted lead. The GPS on his watch went dark 20 minutes ago. Last signal was near the industrial district. He must have taken it off again. Dominic didn't turn around. His reflection in the glass looked like a ghost, eyes hard, jaw set in a line of tempered steel. Matteo Vercetti was a man of 80 with a mind that was slowly becoming a labyrinth. To the world, Matteo was the retired patriarch of a blood-stained empire, but to Dominic, he was the only bridge left to a time when life wasn't defined by body counts and territorial lines. His father didn't see the danger in the shadows, he only saw a city he used to walk when he was young and the world was kinder. "Find him," Dominic said, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. "If a single hair on his head is touched, I don't care who is responsible. I will burn every contract, every bridge, and every block in this city until there is nothing left but ash." He finally turned, the frantic energy of his subordinates freezing the moment his gaze swept the room. The backing of silence was no longer just a title, it was a physical weight. He felt a rare, jagged edge of panic slicing through his chest, a feeling he hadn't known since he was a boy. His father was out there in the freezing rain, vulnerable and confused, walking into the jaws of a city that was currently a powder keg of rival tensions. Dominic grabbed his coat, the leather creaking in the stillness. He didn't wait for his security detail to lead the way. He strode toward the elevator, his mind racing through the names of his enemies, wondering which of them would be foolish enough to use an old man's fading memory as leverage. He didn't know about the delivery girl or the alley. He only knew that his father was alone in the dark, and for the first time in his life, the most powerful man in Chicago felt utterly powerless. "Move," he commanded as the elevator doors hissed open. "We're going to the south side." The industrial district was a graveyard of rusted iron and shattered glass, where the shadows seemed to have teeth. Lily's bike rattled over a pothole, her headlight flickering like a dying pulse. She was cold, she was late, and she was tired down to her marrow, but then she heard it, a sound that cut through the engine's drone. It wasn't the wind. It was the frantic, wet sound of a man struggling to breathe, followed by the heavy thud of a boot hitting bone. Lily skidded to a halt, her tires screaming against the wet asphalt. In the mouth of a narrow alley, bathed in the sickly orange glow of a flickering street lamp, she saw them. Two men, built like brick walls and wearing the jagged aggression of the city's bottom feeders, were hovering over a fallen figure. The old man, Matteo, was slumped against a damp brick wall, his grey hair matted with rain and his expensive wool coat stained with grease. He looked small, fragile, and utterly lost. "Check his pockets again," one thug barked, raising a heavy hand. "Nobody wanders into this neighborhood with a watch like that unless they're looking for trouble." Lily didn't think. She didn't calculate the odds or the debt she owed to her own safety. She kicked the kickstand down, grabbed her heavy metal U-lock, and ran. She reached the group just as the second thug lunged forward. With a guttural cry of "Get away from him!" Lily threw her body between the attackers and the old man. She went down on her knees, her red jacket a bright, defiant splash of color against the grey grime of the alley. Her arms were stretched wide, a human barricade protecting the trembling man behind her. The first blow caught her across the temple, sending a white-hot flash of pain through her skull, but she didn't move. She felt the hot, sharp sting of a blade slicing into her forearm as she blocked a second strike, her blood beginning to soak into her sleeve. "You're going to have to kill me first," she screamed, her voice cracking but her eyes burning with a ferocity that made the thugs hesitate. Behind her, Matteo gasped, his hand clutching the back of her jacket like a drowning man to a life raft. He was shocked, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and wonder at the stranger who was taking his pain as her own. Lily felt the warm blood trickling down her wrist, the rain washing it into the cracks of the pavement, but she didn't yield. She was a delivery girl who owned nothing, kneeling in the dirt to protect the father of a king, standing her ground in a place where mercy was supposed to be dead. The adrenaline that had sustained Lily began to ebb, replaced by the cold, sickening throb of the gash on her arm. The thugs had fled when the sound of a distant siren, real or imagined, cut through the industrial drone, leaving a heavy, ringing silence in the alley. Lily didn't waste a second. She helped Matteo to his feet, his weight leaning heavily against her small frame. He was rambling softly in Italian, his eyes glazed with the fog of his condition, but he clutched her hand with a strength that surprised her. She managed to get him onto the back of her delivery bike, securing him with her own jacket belt to ensure he wouldn't slip. Every rotation of the pedal sent a fresh spike of agony through her sliced forearm, but she pushed through the rain, heading toward the only place she knew, a small, 24-hour charity clinic 3 miles away. She didn't call the police. In her neighborhood, the police meant questions she didn't have time for and a spotlight she couldn't afford. When they arrived at the clinic's sliding glass doors, the fluorescent lights felt like a physical blow. A tired nurse behind the desk looked up, her eyes widening as she saw the girl in the blood-stained red jacket supporting the well-dressed elderly man. He was attacked in the south side, Lily rasped, her voice barely a whisper. She guided Matteo into a plastic waiting room chair. He's confused. I think he's lost. Matteo reached out, his fingers catching the hem of her sleeve. Stay, he murmured, his clarity flickering for a brief second. Dominic, he will want to. You're safe now, Lily interrupted softly, gently prying his hand away. She saw the nurse reaching for a phone and the security guard stepping forward. The Versetti name on the old man's medical alert bracelet caught the light, but Lily didn't stick around to read it. She knew the rules of the city, people like her didn't get thanked, they got caught in the crossfire. She had a debt to pay and a shift to finish, and the longer she stood under these lights, the more real the world became. Before the nurse could ask for her ID or a statement, Lily backed toward the exit. She stepped out into the freezing downpour, the heavy door hissing shut behind her and cutting off the warmth. She climbed onto her bike, her blood mixing with the rainwater on the handlebars, and disappeared into the grey veil of the city. She was a ghost again, a nameless girl in a torn red jacket, leaving behind the only man who could change her life because she was too busy trying to survive it. The doors to the clinic didn't just open, they were nearly torn from their hinges as Dominic Versetti stepped into the sterile, white-tiled light. His presence was a storm that stilled the room, a cold front that made the medical staff freeze in mid-motion. He didn't look at the nurses or the security guards who scrambled to offer explanations. His eyes were locked on the small, hunched figure in the plastic chair at the far end of the hallway. Papa, Dominic breathed, the word a rare crack in his iron facade. He reached Matteo in 3 long strides, dropping to one knee before his father. He checked the man's pulse, his temples, his hands, his fingers trembling with a terror he would never admit to. Matteo looked up, his eyes clear for the first time in hours, though they were bright with the memory of the ordeal. Dominic, he whispered, his voice steadying. She saved me. She didn't have to, but she stayed. Dominic's jaw tightened as he noticed the bruising on his father's shoulder and the grease on his coat. Who, Papa? Where are the men who did this? The men ran, Matteo said, clutching his son's forearm. But the girl, she was like a small bird with the heart of a lion. She wore a jacket the color of a winter sunset, bright red. She got down on the ground, Dominic. She put herself between me and the knives. She was bleeding, and she was crying from the pain, but she wouldn't move. She wouldn't let them touch me. Dominic looked around the room, his gaze settling on a single, smeared handprint of blood on the arm of the chair where the girl had Saturday. It was small, a ghost of a person who had already vanished. Where is she? Dominic demanded, turning to the head nurse. She left, Mr. Versetti, the nurse stammered, clutching a clipboard to her chest. She wouldn't give a name. She just dropped him off and disappeared back into the rain. She looked like she was in a hurry to get back to work. A heavy, dangerous silence settled over Dominic. A girl who had nothing had bled for a man who had everything, and then she had walked away as if her life didn't matter. It was a kind of bravery Dominic didn't understand, a purity that didn't belong in his world. He stood up, his coat billowing as he turned to Sawyer and the 20 men standing like statues by the entrance. His voice was a low, lethal rasp that promised no sleep for anyone in the city tonight. I want every street camera pulled. I want every delivery app's logs for the South Side intercepted. I want the girl in the red jacket, Dominic commanded. She is the only reason my father is breathing. Find her. Bring her to me. And God help anyone who tries to stop her before I do. The morning sun didn't stand a chance against the heavy, bruised clouds lingering over the South Side. In her cramped studio apartment, Lily sat on the edge of her mattress, her breath hitching as she tried to wrap a fresh bandage around her forearm. The gash was angry and red, a jagged reminder of the alley, but she had no time to nurse the wound. She had a noon shift at the diner, and her bike's engine was still damp from the storm. The silence of the building was heavy, broken only by the distant, rhythmic drip of a leaky pipe in the hallway. Then, the silence changed. It wasn't a sudden noise, but a low, vibrating hum that began to rattle the loose panes of her single window. Lily stood up, clutching her arm, as the vibration deepened into a mechanical growl. She moved to the window and pulled back the yellowed lace curtain, her heart leaping into her throat. The street below, usually a chaotic mess of rusted cars and overflowing trash bins, had been frozen in time. 20 black, armored SUVs were gliding down the narrow asphalt in a perfect, terrifying formation. They moved with a predatory grace, their tinted windows reflecting the grey sky like polished obsidian. One by one, they braked, cutting off both ends of the block. The neighborhood, usually alive with the sounds of shouting neighbors and distant sirens, went utterly, deathly silent. People stopped on the sidewalks, their grocery bags hanging limp as they stared at the sudden invasion of wealth and power. Lily watched, paralyzed, as the doors of the lead vehicle swung open. Men in sharp, dark overcoats stepped out, their earpieces glinting in the dull light. They didn't look like police, they looked like soldiers of a shadow government. They moved with a terrifying efficiency, forming a perimeter around her crumbling brick building. The back door of the central SUV opened, and a man stepped out. Even from the third floor, Lily could feel the weight of his presence. He was tall, dressed in a suit that cost more than her entire building, and his gaze was fixed upward, scanning the windows with the precision of a hawk. A frantic knock echoed through her door, not the heavy boot thud of a debt collector, but the sharp, disciplined rap of someone who didn't expect to be kept waiting. Lily looked from her blood-stained red jacket draped over a chair to the line of black steel blocking the world outside. The Versetti name she had glimpsed on the old man's bracelet flashed in her mind like a warning light. The city hadn't ignored her today. It had come to collect. The door didn't break, but the air in the room shattered the moment Dominic Versetti stepped inside. He seemed too large for the cramped studio, a figure of obsidian and iron against the peeling floral wallpaper. Lily stood by her small table, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She didn't reach for a weapon, she only pulled the sleeve of her red jacket lower, trying to hide the makeshift bandage that was already beginning to bloom with fresh crimson. Dominic's eyes didn't go to the meager furniture or the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. They locked onto her face, searching for a motive, a lie, or a hidden agenda. Behind him, the hallway was a wall of silent, suited men, but the silence inside the room was louder. "My father says you are an angel," Dominic said, his voice a low, terrifying rasp that felt like a physical weight. "He says you took a blade meant for him." I saw an old man who was scared," Lily whispered, her voice trembling but steady. "I didn't know who he was. I just couldn't let them keep hitting him." Dominic stepped closer, his shadow swallowing her. He reached out, his hand surprisingly gentle as he grasped her wrist. He didn't ask permission as he pushed the red sleeve up, exposing the jagged, angry cut and the blood-soaked gauze. He stared at the wound for a long beat, his jaw tightening until the bone nearly broke the skin. "You didn't know his name?" he asked, his eyes lifting to hers, intense and searching. "You didn't know that protecting a Versetti is the most dangerous thing a person can do in this city." "I don't care about names," Lily replied, a flicker of her alleyway defiance returning. "He's someone's father. He was alone. That should be enough." Dominic let go of her arm, but he didn't move back. The realization hit him with the force of a blow. She wasn't a player in his world. She wasn't a rival, a spy, or a grifter looking for a payout. She was a girl who lived on tuna and noodles, who worked until her bones ached, and who had bled for a stranger simply because it was the right thing to do. In a city where every act of kindness came with a price tag, she was the only thing Dominic Versetti couldn't buy, a pure soul. "It is more than enough," Dominic said, his voice losing its lethal edge, replaced by a solemn, heavy depth. "You bled to keep my heart beating, Lily Parker. In my world, a debt in blood is never forgotten. It is only repaid." He turned to the door, his silhouette cutting through the light. "Pack a bag. You aren't staying here another hour. From this moment on, you walk in my shadow, and the world will learn what happens to those who touch what belongs to a Versetti." The transition from the grey dampness of the south side to the Versetti estate felt like waking up in a different world, one made of marble, silence, and the scent of expensive cedar. But for Lily, the luxury was a thin veil. She sat in a velvet armchair, her arm freshly stitched and bandaged by a private doctor, watching the sun dip behind the manicured trees. She felt like a glass ornament in a room full of steel. The peace lasted exactly 48 hours. It happened during a quiet dinner with Matteo. The old man was showing Lily a book of old family photographs, his hand steady and his eyes bright with the comfort of her presence. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the dining room didn't just open, they were kicked in. The glass of the grand windows shattered inward in a glittering rain as high-caliber rounds shredded the silk curtains. "Down!" Lily screamed, reacting before she could think. She lunged across the table, her weight slamming into Matteo and driving them both to the floor. She used her own body as a shield, just as she had in the alley, her eyes fixed on the door where shadows were moving fast. She expected the end. She expected the pain. But instead, she witnessed the terrifying clockwork of the Versetti machine. The room didn't erupt in panic, it erupted in precision. Dominic's men appeared from the shadows like ghosts materialized. There was no shouting, only the rhythmic, muffled thud-thud-thud of silenced weapons. Sawyer moved past them, a blur of motion, his face as calm as if he were pouring a drink. He didn't just return fire, he eliminated the threat before it could even breathe the room's air. Dominic entered a second later, his long coat snapping behind him. He didn't look at the fallen attackers, his eyes were on the floor, on the girl who was once again covering his father with her own life. He saw her trembling, her knuckles white as she gripped Matteo's coat, yet she hadn't flinched. He reached down, his large hand wrapping around hers to pull her up. His grip was a promise of safety, but his eyes were pools of frozen rage directed at the world outside. "They thought you were my weakness," Dominic whispered, his voice vibrating with a lethal, terrifying pride. He looked at the chaos his men had efficiently neutralized in under 60 seconds. "They didn't realize that by targeting you, they gave me a reason to stop being merciful." Lily looked at the silent soldiers standing guard, their eyes fixed forward, their loyalty absolute. For the first time in her life, the weight she carried wasn't the burden of debt or hunger, it was the heavy, unbreakable shield of a man who would burn the world to keep her standing. She wasn't a target. She was the heart of the fortress. The chaos of the assassination attempt left a silence that was different from the hollow quiet of Lily's old apartment. This silence was thick, guarded, and laced with the scent of expensive gunpowder and the steady breathing of men who lived to protect her. In the days that followed, the city's underground felt a seismic shift. The rival faction that had dared to use Lily as bait didn't just disappear, they were erased, their names scrubbed from the ledgers of the city by a Dominic Versetti who no longer fought for territory, but for the sanctity of his home. The red jacket she had worn for years was gone, replaced by soft woolen silks that didn't itch or smell of exhaust. Yet, it wasn't the clothes that changed Lily, it was the chair at the end of the long mahogany dining table. It wasn't a seat for a guest or a temporary ward, it was a permanent place between a son who had rediscovered his humanity and a father who had found his way home. One evening, as the first snow of December began to dust the city, Dominic walked into the library to find Lily and Matteo huddled over a map of Italy. Matteo was tracing the lines of his childhood village, his voice melodic and full of life, while Lily listened with a focus that suggested she was finally learning a history of her own. Dominic stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the girl who had once been a ghost in the rain. She looked up and caught his eye, and for the first time, the martyr's exhaustion was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady belonging. That night, Lily climbed into a bed that felt like a cloud. For years, her sleep had been a thin, brittle thing, easily shattered by the ghost vibration of a phone she feared would be a debt collector, or the rhythmic drip of a ceiling she couldn't afford to fix. She used to lie awake counting pennies and minutes, her heart racing at every siren that wailed in the distance. But as she pulled the heavy down comforter to her chin, the only sound was the crackle of a fire in the hearth and the muffled, rhythmic footsteps of the guards in the hallway outside. Her phone sat dark and silent on the nightstand, the debts were paid, the running had stopped, and the rain no longer felt like a threat. Lily Parker closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the Versetti legacy wrap around her like a shield. For the first time in 22 years, the invisible girl wasn't just safe, she was home. And as the city froze outside, she finally drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep, knowing that the most dangerous man in Chicago was standing watch over her peace. Lily's story reminds us that our true worth isn't found in the balance of our bank accounts or the titles we hold, but in the choices we make when no one is watching. It teaches us that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the girl in the red jacket who stays on her knees to protect a stranger when the rest of the world has turned its back. Sometimes, the most powerful shield in the world isn't made of steel, but of a human heart that refuses to let someone suffer alone. In a city that can feel cold and indifferent, we don't need a crown to be a protector, we only need the grace to see someone else's pain as our own. If Lily and Matteo's journey moved you, please press like and share this video so their story of silent bravery can reach those who need to hear it. Subscribe to our channel to join us for new stories every day that find light in the darkest corners. We would truly love to hear from you. What part of Lily's sacrifice stirred your heart the most? Was there a moment that brought a tear to your eye, or a character that reminded you of someone you've known? Please share your thoughts and your own stories of kindness from deep within your heart in the comments below. We'd also love for you to rate this story on a scale of 1 to 10 and let us know which part of the world you're watching from. Every word you leave gives us the inspiration to keep telling stories that honor the hero in all of us. We wish every one of you watching health, a life filled with purpose, and the peace of a safe home. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you in the next video.